In my lifetime, I have witnessed the rapid growth of Shankill, which has grown from a small village with a population of a few hundred to a suburban sprawl, home now to more than 16,000 people, all within the last 50 years or so. We are fortunate to live in an area that has a unique location sandwiched between the hills and the sea and steeped in antiquity, which can be traced back to well before the birth of Christ. In this brief video, I'm attempting to document some of the change in times in Shankill through the ages. There is evidence that the Shankill area was inhabited as early as 2,500 years before the birth of Christ. There are a number of remnants from the Dark Ages, including Raz and cromlechs, as well as derelict churches to support this. There are ruins of several castles stemming from the Middle Ages, including Puck's Castle, Shankill Castle, Shangana Castle, and there is a remnant of a Martello Tower on Shangana Cliffs. The name Shankill is believed to be derived from either the Irish word Shankill, which means old church, or Shankill, meaning old wood. If you are travelling from Shankill towards Dunleary via the Ballybrack Road, you will see a spectacular cluster of stones that has been left undisturbed in a field for some 4,500 years. This impressive structure has a capstone that weighs approximately 12 tonnes and it's mounted in place on 4 supporting stones. The underside of the capstone is completely flat. It's not clear when, why or by whom the earliest cromlechs are made. They are generally regarded as tombs or burial chambers. In the neighbouring parish of Rathmichael, west of Shankill, just off the Ballycourse Road, the ruins of an old church can be found. This Norman structure was first mentioned in 1179 and was probably built on or near the site of an early monastic community. The ruins of the church are found near the remains of what once would have been the largest ring forts or raths in Ireland. The church is believed to be dedicated to Saint Mochtal. The name Mochtal was later changed to the name Michael, and the name Rathmichael is likely to have come from Rath Mochtal, meaning Mochtal's ring fort. The church, in ruins since the 17th century, is surrounded by a burial ground containing several well-preserved slabs of stone, bearing markings unique to Christian monuments in the area. At the west end of the church are the remains of a round tower, approximately 2 meters high, and it has a circumference of 16 meters. The tower is known locally as the Skull Hole. The Skull Hole is believed to be a reference to when skulls and bones from the adjoining burial ground were dumped, rather than being reinterred when the graveyard was cleared to create additional space. There is a story of an underground passage that leads from the round tower to the sea, and of a piper who descended into the passage playing his instrument and was never to be seen again. The remains of a passage have been found close to the tower. In the early centuries, the whole countryside of Rathmichael and Shankill was covered by dense forests. In 1230, the church hierarchy ordered the local forests to be felled and cleared. Just off the Commons Road in Shangana lay the ruins of Shankill Castle. Built by the clergy in 1228, successive members of clergy resided there and presided over the civil courts for the whole area. People who were charged with committing serious crimes were tried and sentenced. Neighbouring the castle there was a small village with 17 dwellings, and a church lay close to the entrance of the castle. Some historians feel this old church may have given Shankill its name. The remains of the castle can still be seen today in a private residence at Mill Lane on the Shangana Road. Adjoining Shankill to the north lay the district of Shangana, which stretched from Abington Park on the Ballybrack Road to Corban Lane. In the 13th century, the lands were divided into two areas. The northern part of the district was called Rathsalcan, and the southern part, joining Cork Abbey, was named Kiltuck. Records show there was a dispute between the owners of Rathsalcan and Kiltuck over the diversions of the watercourse of the Shangana River, which affected the corn mill located in the lane in Rathsalcan. The bridge over the Shangana River is reported to be the oldest bridge in the area and is triple arched. Many years ago fish were plentiful in the river, and in more recent times the Shangana Angling Club was set up. Puck's Castle is situated off the Ballycorus Road and was built in the late 16th century, and although little is known about its purpose, it's said to have provided a refuge in 1690 for James II and his army fleeing the Battle of the Boyne. One explanation for its name is that a ghost or puka inhabited the castle. The Walsh family come to prominence in the 16th century, having taken ownership of the lands willed to them from the Lawless family. They began building several defensive structures in Shankill. Around this time, Shankill was absorbed into the parish of Rathmichael. The Walshes vacated the lands of Shankill, and the lands were subsequently redistributed into tenancies. During this time, St. James Church in Crinkin was built. The first minister was Reverend John Winthorpe Hackett, who lived nearby in the Memorial Hall on the Bray Road in Crinkin. This dwelling was converted to the Shangana Marble and Stone Centre in 1984. The church, with seating for 500, was damaged by fire in 1921, but retained its impressive crypt. In 1845, William Donville acquired tracts of land in the Shankill area, which included the entire townlands of Shankill and Rathmichael. He decided he would improve his property at Shankill to increase his income from it. Donville intended to build grand Georgian-style housing developments, squares and streets to gentrify the area, thereby making it attractive for wealthy, well-heeled Dublin city-based professionals to live in. One of his projects was to let land on long leases for the building of villas for the gentry. To do this, he had to regain control over the best land in Shankill, as it was already sublet to tenants. Donville managed this by buying out the leases, and then he evicted most of the subtenants off his property. Many families were thrown off their land. Eventually, after putting in a great deal of investment to the area, including new roads, plantations and even the building of Rathmichael Church, he found his income from Shankill was reduced. The net outcome of Donville's actions was to halve the population of Shankill and Rathmichael during the 1860s. He evicted over 100 tenants during this period in famine times and savage poverty, and many were forced to renegotiate their tenancies at outrageous rates. Countless evicted tenants ended up in the local workhouse, the Rathdown Union Workhouse, which was on an 8-acre site in Loughlinstown and is now the site of St. Columkille's Hospital. The workhouses have been described as the most feared and hated institutions ever established in Ireland. The main H-block design had different sections designated for different groups housed there. The main workhouse, where inmates were strictly segregated according to age and gender, had a sick bay flanked by lunatic cells. The grounds were enclosed by 8-foot walls, and the food supplied was of unacceptable quality. The clanging of the poorhouse bell told the paupers when to rise, wash, eat and work. Orders had to be instantly obeyed, while card games, smoking and drinking was not permitted. Punishments for non-compliance were denial of food, solitary confinement in a cell known as the Black Hole. Built for a maximum of 600 inmates, in 1850 7,000 people were admitted. Corpses without coffins were carried on carts day after day to be thrown into mass burial pits in the workhouse grounds. The few able-bodied men maintained the buildings, acted as messengers and worked on the treadmill operating the water pump and carried water from the Shangana River when it failed. The women performed domestic chores and assisted in the laundry. The beds were raised wooden platforms, some with straw covering. The pauper's graveyard, located at the back of the workhouse, can still be visited. The adjoining field is now home of Valeview Football Club. The graveyard continued to be used until 1939, and the institution was finally closed by 1920. After the demise of Domville, Benjamin Tilley, a landowner with holdings adjacent to Shankill townland, granted quarter-acre sites to some of the evicted tenants. They built new homes, which became known as Brennan's Cottages, on what was to be called the Lower Road, to distinguish it from the main Dublin road. The community was soon called Tilleystown, and it had its own school, St. Anne's, in a hall built in 1867 on land secured from the Tilley family. The hall was demolished in the 1980s. St. Anne's Hall was at the southern end of the Lower Road, and part of Brady's pub car park is built on the site. Tilleystown was extended, and on the tract of land to the west of Shankill, numerous cottages were built. A feature of these cottages was the construction of pig-sties in the gardens of the houses to promote self-sufficiency. Practically every household cultivated a small vegetable plot and kept a few hens. The area was called New Vale. Locksink was built in a valley to the west adjoining New Vale in the 1930s. A library was built in 1912. Over the years, the library has been used as a courthouse and even as a temporary church. There was a lane used by locals running from Locksink around the library and crossed the Library Road and continued on to Shankill's original train station. Further tracts of land were given for housing development. One such field, located 500 yards from the main road behind Brady's pub, was known locally as the Bull Field. In the centre of the field was a large granite stone where the bull was tethered. This land was owned by the Erck family, who resided in Sherrington House since the 1860s. Erck's house and the surrounding lands became a caravan site called Sprites in later years. The land donated by Erck was developed as a housing estate with 33 houses built on the site in the 1950s. Originally called Erck's Estate, it's now renamed Assumpta Park. Lead was discovered at Ballycorus in the opening years of the 19th century. At Ballycorus, the mines were never really productive, and mining was abandoned and recommenced several times. The lead works at Ballycorus processed lead being brought from elsewhere, and the company acquired mines at Glendalough and the Wicklow Gap. The lead was brought to Shankill train station and then by horse and cart to the lead mines for refining. This process became uneconomical later in the 19th century, and the company began to bring lead in from elsewhere, particularly the Isle of Man. Following on from the French Revolution in the early years of the 19th century, England was at war with France. The British had a real fear of invasion by Napoleon. Ireland was the likely landing place for invading forces, and Killiney Bay was particularly a vulnerable place. It was decided to build a number of fortifications along the coastline in the form of Martello towers stretching from Bray to Sandymount. Each of these martellos were numbered 1 to 16 and were spaced out roughly 1 mile apart. Tower number 5 is located on the top of Shangana Cliffs. A tree-lined path known as the Battery Wood leads to it, and although there's no actual tower built, one was certainly under consideration. Remains of the garrison, which accommodated 30 to 40 soldiers, is still there, and underneath is a vaulted chamber used as an ammunition store. The battery consisted of 3 apartments, one of which was fitted out as an officer's guard room. The battery was dismantled in 1915. Further up the coast, not far from Quinns Road Beach, stood Tower Number 4 on lands belonging to Shangana Castle. The tower was blown up by army engineers in about 1906 due to coastal erosion. Shangana Castle was acquired late in life by General Sir George Cockburn. General Cockburn was a noted classicist, travel writer and collector of antiquities, mainly carved stone, tiles and ceramics, which he kept in a specially dedicated monument room. The grounds include the ruins of the ancient church of Kiltuck. Between 1969 and 2002, the property was used as an open prison for juvenile delinquents. Much of the land has been sold off and a housing estate, Castle Farm, was built on the site. Before the Harcourt Street line, Shankill was accessible via the original Kingston to Bray train line. A coastal wall was built from Killarney to Bray to try to stop erosion. Traces of the wall can still be seen along the beach. The original Kingston to Bray Railroad was installed in 1852 and ran 5 metres from the sea cliffs in some places. Shankill was accessible via a platform near the Battery Woods at Shangana Cliffs. Sir Stanley Cochrane inherited a vast quantity of land from his renowned father, who, alongside with Dr. Thomas Cantrell, invented the soft drink ginger ale and made a fortune exporting it to the United States. Many people will be familiar with the soft drink brand C&C. Upon the death of his father in 1904, Cochrane inherited his millions and the Woodbrook estate. Cochrane was an avid cricket fan and a first-class cricket player in his own right. He worked to bring regular top-class cricket to Ireland, even paying the Australians £300 to play Dublin University in 1905. Shortly after, he founded Woodbrook Cricket Club and built a cricket ground on his estate and constructed a railway stop on the old Kingston to Bray railway line to serve the ground. Using his wealth, Cochrane enticed many leading players of the day to play for the club. However, attendances at Cochrane's cricket ground were a lot lower than expected. He closed the cricket ground in 1913 and opted to construct the well-known Woodbrook Golf Course. It was established as a private club in 1921, and Woodbrook was first affiliated to the Golfing Union of Ireland in 1926. The club has hosted many tournaments and was the first host of the revived Irish Open in 1975 and has also hosted the PGA Championships on 6 occasions. The Harcourt Street line was the former railroad between Dublin's Harcourt Street station and Bray, opened by William Dargan in 1854 and was closed in 1958. The driver of the last train to leave Harcourt Street Station was Mr. Kelly, a resident of Shankill. Parts of the railway can be still seen from Stonebridge Road and the main road bridge just up from St. Anne's Church. The magnificent old Shangana Valley Viaduct, known locally as the Five Arches, crosses the Cherrywood Road. The line ran through the centre of Shankill under the bridge in the main street and continued on to Bray. The station in Shankill was opened in 1854 and was located just off the main Dublin Road, almost opposite St. Anne's Church in what is now Shankill Office Park. St. Anne's Church was built in the 1930s on land donated by Frank Field, a racehorse breeder. At long last, people in Shankill had their own church and didn't have to go to Cabinteely, Little Bray or Ballybrack on Sundays when cars were few and far between in Shankill. The 12th century Kiltuck cross from neighbouring Shangana Castle now stands on the plinth in the church grounds. In 1827, William Hopper acquired 160 acres of land between Shangana Road and the sea. He built Shangana House around 1832. The house had several owners through the ages and once was the home to a racehorse breeder, Frank Field, who had donated land to Shankill parish for the building of St Anne's Church. The mansion was compulsory purchased by Dublin County Council in the early 70s. During this time, the land surrounding Shangana House from Corban Lane to the Shangana River was let to a Dutchman, Dr. M. Baradi. The farmland was called the Dutchman's Fields, and the whole area north of Corban Lane was populated with hundreds of tons of potatoes, and it brought employment to many locals picking the potatoes. In the mid-70s, a new housing estate called Rathdown, which was a corruption from the ancient name Rathsalacan, was built on lands and was further extended over the railway tracks and named Shangana Cliffs. A new school, School Wirra, was included in the development. Corban Lane was the main access to the sea. Nowadays it's a long straight road with a hump over the tracks leading down to the stony beach. In years past it was just a lane with no lighting or motor access. There used to be a path from Killiney to Bray on the top of the cliff that went alongside the old railway line. Flanked by a deep ditch on both sides of the lane with a small stream running towards the sea, it had bushes and hedges lining the whole road. Due to coastal erosion, the railway line was moved from its place near the sea some half a mile inland to its present position cutting across Corban. The old railway bridge at the entrance to the shore was blown up in the late 50s and remnants of it are still visible at the entrance to the beach. In earlier times there were only 3 houses on the right hand side of Corban Lane before the bridge and none on the left. Over the bridge there was 1 house on the left, although it was in from the road, and there were 2 houses on the right hand side of the road. The Queen's Rock was a big boulder approximately 20 metres from the shore, which locals used to use as a diving platform where most of the sea-going locals tested their swimming skills. When the sea was out, there was a narrow stretches of sand to play on. Access to the beach was difficult enough years ago, using the remains of the blown-up bridge to hop down to the seashore, but it has since been improved. The first house on the right-hand side was called Claremont, then Thomond, then Maryland. All have now been demolished and have been replaced with modern developments like Dorney Court. The Garda station is situated where Claremont stood, and the only house on the left-hand side of the lane was Eaton Bray, and this area has been developed as a housing estate. Adjoining Mickey Burns pub on the main road in Shankill, separated by a lane, was Frank Doyle's house. Just behind the house, Mr. Doyle had a number of outbuildings, one of which was an abattoir, known locally as a slaughterhouse. Frank had a small field attached to the abattoir where he used to graze his animals before they met their end. Every Wednesday a shot rang out as another animal was killed. The animals were sold to local butchers. There was an old forge located in the area in bygone years where it's believed it was used by travelling folk en route to Bray or Dublin to shoe horses and carry out repairs on their carriages. In more recent times a well-known garage owner was based in the site of the old forge. A very popular tourist resort was established along the cliffs at Quinns Road in the late 50s and early 60s. A number of holiday chalets were built to accommodate visitors from Dublin during the summer months. The chalets were located along the cliffs at the southern end of Shankill on land owned by the Byrne family, who were owners of the famous Mickey Burns pub. Troves of visitors descended on Shankill during the summer months. This practice ceased when the cliffs started showing signs of coastal erosion. The Byrne family owned tracts of land in the Quinns Road. St Anne's Park housing estate was developed on the land owned by the Byrne family. St Anne's School was built in 1960 and received pupils from 2 smaller schools in the area, the 3-teacher co-ed school located in St Anne's Hall in Shankill Lower Road and a smaller school located in Loughlinstown just south of the Silver Tassie. The school was officially opened in 1961 and cost £20,000 to build. Shankill had its own manufacturing industry in the 1960s, which brought welcome employment to the village. The box factory was located on land owned by local resident Dr. Fennell, where the Tesco shop and the apartment complex is now located in the middle of the village. All manner of pallets, crates and wooden boxes were made there.